Fantasy value and real world value are usually pretty linked, but not always. I've got Ryan Bloomfield on the line today to talk about some players whose real world projected value is low enough that their fantasy value might suddenly collapse, a la Nick Castellanos of last year. Who could be 2026's Nick Castellanos? We'll try to answer that question right after this on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Hello and welcome everybody to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Fantrax. Erik Halterman here with Ryan Bloomfield of Baseball HQ. Ryan, it is that time of year where the fantasy world is shifting more and more towards baseball. We're finally back fully on the RotoWire YouTube channel here. Hello to everybody who's watching here. How is your off-season going so far? Are you in the weeds of any big off-season series over on the Bubba and the Bloom pod?
Yeah, we pretty much never stop. So, at Bubba and the Bloom with my good friend and co-host Casey Bubba, we go twice a week, Tuesday, Thursday nights, year round. But then there's Baseball Forecaster in October. We get to hang out, Eric, at First Pitch Arizona in November. So it's just a constant year-round thing for me. But I will admit, it is very nice to see everyone starting to come back to the good side, as I like to say, and glad you guys are streaming these live on YouTube again now. That's good. It's all good.
Yeah, happy to have anybody come along and join us with some live questions during the show. Love to have the conversation going on. We will be talking today about Nick Castellanos. Well, not really. We'll be talking about this year's Nick Castellanos. You might remember for several years, Nick Castellanos produced quite a bit of fantasy value despite his WAR trending closer and then even maybe below zero. Players like that are useful for fantasy purposes until they aren't anymore, when their bad defense and lack of walks catches up to them. We're going to try to take a look at some players who could be at risk of their playing time just bottoming out at some point this season. And for Castellanos, to be fair, he actually held out, I think, until pretty late last year. So some of these guys will probably keep regular playing time for most of the year before collapsing, but we're just going to try to figure out exactly how worrisome some of these players are. But as always, wanted to start with some of the headlines, and things have slowed down since last week, but we did get a couple interesting signings the last few days, including at the end of last week, Seranthony Dominguez signing a 2-year deal with the Chicago White Sox. Now, Ryan, the last couple years, I think I've said that there were a maximum of 28 closers for fantasy teams to fight over, right? If nobody went to a committee, there still wouldn't be 30 because nobody wants the Rockies closer. And in the past couple of years, nobody wanted the White Sox closer. They just weren't going to win enough games that it was worth chasing whoever was their top man in the 9th inning. Is that still true? Or would you be totally fine with Seranthony Dominguez as your closer too on a lot of teams?
Totally fine isn't probably the exact feeling I'd have, but I think I'd bite the bullet and do it. And the market is kind of doing that as well. In some recent NFBC draft and hold drafts, Seranthony Dominguez has been going as early as 88, but kind of settling in that 120 to 150 range, which is a little bit of a copy of how the closer market is just bonkers this year. Every closer that has a job is expensive, but Seranthony Dominguez has the job. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Right after the signing, the White Sox pretty much came out and said Seranthony Dominguez is the guy. Now, is Seranthony Dominguez a lockdown closer? No, like he misses a ton of bats. The Ks are good, but there are some major walk rate issues, so we will see. But I think Seranthony Dominguez is good enough to hold the role for, as long as he can limit the walks. And again, given the prices of closers so far this draft season, I think it is. I count maybe 18 to 20 relievers right now that have firm jobs and with varying degrees of skill within that 18 to 20. And at least in the drafts that I have been, all of those closers are getting pushed up. And I think Dominguez is probably near the end of that 18 to 20 range. But if you have the job in this environment, the White Sox may not be that bad this season. I don't mind taking Seranthony Dominguez as your second closer, even if you've got to pay a 120 to 150 overall pick to get it.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you on the White Sox maybe not being that bad. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to say they're even an outside chance at being relevant in September or anything like that. But this could be just a normal bad team, one that wins 70 games or something like that. And there's plenty of examples of closers on normal bad teams who are perfectly useful fantasy pieces as long as they have a clear hold on the job. And that sure seems to be the case with Dominguez. Jordan Leisure, an interesting pitcher, but his numbers are no better than Dominguez is, and he has 9 career saves compared to 40 for Dominguez, and Dominguez has been named the guy. So pretty sure he's going to be the guy, at least through the trade deadline, and that's enough to make him draftable as a closer too. We got Harrison Bader signing with the Giants a couple days ago. I'm not sure that there's much appeal here, partially because the deal is with the Giants, right? Harrison Bader, a fringy fantasy option, and when you put a guy like that in one of the toughest hitters parks in the league, it's tough to be all that interested, right?
Yeah, fringy. I mean, I guess the somewhat good news is, I mean, we figured Harrison Bader would sign somewhere. We weren't 100% sure if it'd be an everyday gig. I mean, the good news is that this is an everyday gig, and Harrison Bader is being picked outside the top 300, I believe, in drafts right now. And finding outfielders that play every day that don't necessarily hurt you in a single category that late in drafts as like your 5th outfielder, I think that can work. So yeah, like the park isn't ideal, but Harrison Bader is right-handed. He's got some pull power, so that does help given the shorter left field wall in San Francisco. I think this is like a 15-15 type guy with I don't know, 250, 260 batting average. Again, modest all-around production. He's going to play every day. More of a draft and hold type pick with a limited ceiling. Like that type of player I like to take in draft and holds as opposed to fab leagues. But, I mean, I don't know. I think you can kind of oatmeal your way into a decent pick with Bader as your 5th outfielder if you just need stable playing time that won't do really any major damage to any categories.
Yeah, that's fair enough. He is definitely an everyday guy, or at least we should say everyday, as long as his body allows. Did you know that last year was actually the first time that he even cleared 450 plate appearances, let alone 500? He had 501. That beat his previous career high of 437 set the year before. So wouldn't project much more than that, but at least while he's on the field, should be a playable option in a lot of formats. The hidden winner of this might actually be Justin Crawford of the Phillies. I think the Phillies were already saying that he was going to be the guy, but the only way that I could have envisioned that not being true is if the Phillies did bring back Harrison Bader. Again, they weren't saying that was going to happen, but you could have seen it happening for a pretty reasonable price. He only signed a 2-year, $20.5 million deal. That could have been a late signing by the Phillies, but with that out of the way, I think Justin Crawford pretty much is the starting center fielder for the Phillies.
Agreed.
One more signing to talk about. This is a player that I would not normally include in the start of a show, but because he's going to the Rockies, Edouard Julien. He was just acquired from the Twins for with Pearson Ole in exchange for Jace Kaminska and cash considerations. And there's every chance that cash considerations helps your team more than Edouard Julien does this year. But we got to talk about any player who might play regularly for the Rockies. And looking at this depth chart, Ryan, I mean, are you starting Edouard Julien at first base every day for the Rockies, or at least every day against righties?
I mean, Julien does have, 2 paths to play. He could play first or slide back to second base as well.
Yeah.
It's these golden opportunities, these playing time opportunities on bad teams for fantasy. We do care about what team they're on, but playing time is the biggest thing. And I guess Edouard Julien is probably a strong side platoon bat at either first or somewhere on the right side of that infield. Now, Edouard Julien has, comes with issues. Wins above replacement WAR will be a common theme in our show today. Checked in, or is projected for basically to be replacement level with a major strikeout rate for Julien. Much more valuable given his plate patience in kind of points leagues or OBP leagues. But I think anybody who joins the Rockies with the power that Julien has, with the batting average boost that Coors Field brings, even though Julien may hit down in the lineup, I still don't think draftable in like 15-team fab leagues. But again, my mind right now in January is on these kind of draft and hold formats, and I'm okay with it as a kind of a backup middle infielder for Edouard Julien.
Yeah, I think I recently took him in like the 48th round of a draft and hold, and I was pretty
That's not
happy.
bad, man.
Yeah,
Yes.
that one worked out pretty well. Hopefully, well, again, I say that he's probably going to have the job for the first 3 weeks of the season and then
No.
get DFA'd. But
Take your Edward Julian victory lap on January 28th.
yeah,
That's a good value there.
I may well be sticking my 47th round pick in the lineup the first week of the season, depending on matchups. We'll see. But I think it's time to move on to the main topic of today's show, which is finding this year's Nick Castellanos. So what we're going to be talking about today is some players whose WAR projections, according to ATC, you could really use any of the projection systems for this, but if you want to get a sense of what do the projections broadly think about a player, then I prefer using ATC because it takes a weighted average of a whole bunch of different projection systems. We're looking at players who, well, first we'll go projected for less than 2 WAR, then we'll go with some lower thresholds than that. But the reason I'm using 2 WAR, Ryan, is 2 WAR is generally considered to be a league average regular, right? So if a player projects for 2 WAR, that means they're good enough to play pretty much every day. And players good enough to play pretty much every day, we should feel pretty comfortable drafting early. But I've got a handful of players here who are being drafted in the first 10 rounds of a 15-team league and don't project to be even everyday players. I could bring that up on screen now. Here is our list. We have 8 players here. I'll read them all off, and then we'll go over a couple of the most interesting names in this group. We've got Hunter Goodman, projected for just 1.8. Agustin Ramirez, projected for just 1. Vinnie Pasquantino, 1.9. Christian Yelich, 1.8. Luis Robert, 1.8. Joe Adell, 1.6. Teoscar Hernandez, 1.6. And Noelvi Marte, 0.6. So again, WAR, not a fantasy stat. But I do think something like this is pretty useful to look at, Ryan, when trying to figure out just how safe is the playing time for these guys.
I honestly like the concept here and the formatting of your halter boards, we can call them. Well done, Eric. I like the concept here because we don't use WAR for fantasy. I haven't really seen this concept very, very often. Quite honestly, do we all know exactly what the WAR formula is? No, but it's a very nice way to see how these players are in real life baseball. And again, typically that doesn't matter for fantasy until it does when they lose playing time because they are not real life, producers. So I like the concept here, and very eye-opening. I think a couple other things I'll take into account, and we'll talk about kind of these players, as we go, I think the biggest thing is the team context, right? Like where is that team in terms of windows, of competitive windows? In case of some of these guys like Hunter Goodman at the top, is Colorado ever in a competitive window? Are there other alternatives on the roster, either in the majors or in the minors, for that team where the team could, if there's a better alternative, that's a higher chance of the incumbent getting booted. So some of these guys I'm worried about, others not so much. So I think it's nice to kind of have this starting point of the discussion of how we feel about these guys.
Yeah, and thank you for the compliment on the halter boards. They can't quite compete with your bloom boards, but
you got the color coding down. This is an excellent start.
I'm trying. Every year when I bring you on the show, I bring my A game to the spreadsheets here, and then everybody else gets just plain spreadsheets with no color coding at all. But let's take a look at the top name here. Hunter Goodman going inside the top 75 picks and is projected for less than 2 wins above replacement. Are we worried at all? This was one where I didn't think so. I'm pretty sure Hunter Goodman is comfortably better than the Rockies' other options, good enough to even play DH plenty of the time. Maybe the fact that he's a good but not great bat who plays some DH is hurting his WAR, but in general, I don't think I'm going to be as worried about Hunter Goodman suddenly bottoming out, although we should remember last year was kind of out of nowhere, so we shouldn't forget what he did the first couple seasons in the league, and the projection system would very much remember what he did in 2023 and 2024.
Yeah, agreed. So on top of the somewhat shaky defense for Hunter Goodman, it is a career 291 on base percentage. right? So that, I mean, that's not great. Hunter Goodman, had a 323 OBP last year, but in limited samples in 2023 and 24 was not that great. But I'm not concerned, honestly. This is one where, again, you look at the Rockies roster, competitive window with the Rockies is just not things that should be said in the same sentence. I don't think Braxton Fulford, who's the backup catcher currently on the Rockies, is going to push for at least the primary role. Like, sure, any catcher you're going to get, the backup's going to get 1 to 2 starts maybe a week. But Hunter Goodman played 39 games at DH last year, so I think the power is good enough. The team's bad enough that I think they're just going to let Goodman play and kind of see what they have with him.
All right, I'm right with you there, but this next catcher on the list, Agustin Ramirez, only projected for 1 WAR. Over at Fangraphs last year, Agustin Ramirez was a replacement level player. Despite how excited we were about him for fantasy purposes, this was a catcher who hit 21 homers and stole 16 bases. Okay, he also had some of the worst defense around at the catcher position and has a very poor on-base percentage, just 287 last year. This is a guy who I think is getting some bust buzz, if that's a thing, whatever the opposite of buzz is. Agustin Ramirez, do you think that he's all but a lock to get enough plate appearances that he'll be fine for fantasy purposes? Or do you think there's at least, a 10-20% chance that he could be even back in the minors or stuck as a backup?
I'm pretty confident the Goose, the Goose, as we have several questionable nicknames that we anoint players over at our Bubba and the Bloom podcast. Agustin Ramirez is affectionately known as the Goose in our circles. I'm honestly not worried. I know the name was somewhat besmirched on yesterday's RotoWire podcast, and I get the arguments for that, but I just think this is a 24-year-old catcher who the Marlins, like, realistically, it's in their best interest to see what they have with Agustin Ramirez, either behind the plate or in DH. And again, for fantasy, I don't really care if Ramirez goes to DH. He is eligible at catcher this season for redraft leagues. So that's really all I care about. Now, for dynasty, like, will Agustin Ramirez, is there a decent chance he moves off catcher and becomes a DH or first baseman? That hurts his long-term fantasy value. Sure. But I'm totally fine if the Marlins move Agustin Ramirez off of catcher and move him to DH. I do think the leash will be long because, again, Liam Hicks, like, that's the backup catcher. Sorry to the Hicks family for that, but he's not that great. And there's an open DH spot. So, like, I just think there's plenty of avenues for Miami to keep Ramirez's bat in the lineup, even though the defense is admittedly shaky. And really, last year we saw that with Ramirez, like, pretty much played half and half between catcher and DH. 73 catcher games in 2025 and 63 DH games last season. So I'm not too worried about Agustin Ramirez. I think the Goose is a top 5 catcher for me right now, just because the speed that he brings to the catching position. He's somewhat of a unicorn. I think the playing time's safe.
All right, so still pretty confident there. I think I'd agree that this is something that could really become a problem in a year or two, but he probably gets another year of grace from the Marlins. The only thing I would say against what you were saying is, how sure are we that he will be given those DH at bats? I mean, he only had a 91 WRC plus last year. The projections call for something between a 96 or 95 and 106 this year. So basically calling him just a league average hitter. Although, again, it's the Marlins, right? All he has to do is be better than Heriberto Hernandez, Christopher Morel.
Right.
I think
Like
that the competition's low enough, right?
Agreed.
Exactly.
I think on a contending team with a deep roster, yes, I'd be a lot more concerned because I think the leash should be a little bit tighter. But I think on the Marlins, man, I think there's nowhere else to really turn, in my opinion.
All right, so we can see the downside, but we don't think it's coming for Agustin Ramirez. I'm going to group these next 2 guys together, Vinnie Pasquantino and Christian Yelich, because I think both of them probably not too worried. They're both projected for just under 2 WAR, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact that Pasquantino is going to play first base and Yelich is going to play DH. WAR penalizes you at those 2 spots. If you are worried about either of those 2, let me know. Otherwise, I think we can say probably Pasquantino and Yelich are in the clear.
Yep, I think totally in the clear. And this is the one of the issues with kind of filters is 0.1 more WAR Vinnie P is not on this list, and 0.2 more WAR Yelich is not on this list, despite being DH. So agreed. I don't think we need to talk those two.
All right, let's look then at the next. Let's take all three of the next outfielders together. Luis Robert, Joe Adell, and Teoscar Hernandez. Robert projected for 1.8, Adell and Hernandez projected for 1.6. There are some real negatives in these players' games. In addition to the durability for Luis Robert, he could lose all of his playing time through nothing to do with performance. He might just break. Adell certainly does not have the best plate discipline numbers. Teoscar Hernandez, bit of a free swinger too. You could see the downside for all these guys, and they are going early enough that if you get, close to a 0 for 4 months out of Joe Adell, that's going to hurt if you took him with, your 8th round pick. Are you particularly worried or particularly unworried about either Luis Robert, Joe Adell, or Teoscar Hernandez?
I'll be honest. I don't love seeing Teoscar on this list. Yeah. And at a 1.6 WAR, because the other thing here that we haven't really brought up yet is age. If the theme of this episode is this year's Nick Castellanos last season was his age 33 season, at a time where really performance starts to decline. And Teoscar Hernandez in 2025, this will be his age 33 season. So I love the bat for Teoscar Hernandez. I love the projections versus the ADP. I just drafted Teoscar Hernandez in my current draft and hold yesterday. But context-wise, if the defense isn't there, LA is deep enough that they have other replacements. They could move Tommy Edman back out to the outfield and have Hyesung Kim go second base. They have options there that they can move around. I could see if the bat doesn't carry Teoscar Hernandez like it didn't with Castellanos last year, I think if that happens, there's a chance Teoscar could, at the very least, kind of be moved out for a defensive sub late in the game, things like that. So that one worries me a little bit. Not too worried about Joe Adell, just because, again, Angels, like not to bag on the Angels here, but who else are they going to throw out there in the outfield? And then Luis Robert, I think he's got a long leash given what the Mets gave up to acquire Luis Robert a couple weeks ago.
All right, so Teoscar Hernandez may be one of the biggest worries so far on this list. Should note that Hernandez only put up 0.6 WAR, according to Fangraphs last season. Yeah, the year before that, 3.4. He's got another 3 and another 4 on there in recent seasons, but he's trending in the wrong direction. He only had a 284 on base percentage last year. Mm-hmm. Still had enough power that he was an above average hitter, but just barely. It all added up to a 102 WRC plus. So for a corner outfielder who doesn't really run, doesn't have much defense, he can't really afford another step back. So anybody taking a bet on Teoscar Hernandez is really hoping for no aging in his age 33 season. Should we go to the final guy on this list here, Noelvi Marte, who is projected for just 0.6 WAR, and that's over 537 plate appearances. This is not just the projections saying, I think there's no room for him on that Cincinnati depth chart, but hey, that Cincinnati depth chart is still fairly crowded. It's been a theme in recent years that there's maybe 1-2 too many players who look like they could be viable major leaguers. Noelvi Marte can't afford to have a bad couple months to start the year. And, this is the guy who, for his career, has been worth 0.2 wins above replacement. He's coming off his best year where he was worth 1.1 in 90 games. So that's getting close to average regular territory. Maybe the projections just don't know what to do with a guy who has a PED suspension in there and some really bad numbers at the start of his career. Maybe this is just the projections being confused, but I was surprised to see the number just so low for Noelvi Marte. Should we be worried?
Yes, extremely worried. I did not realize the number was this bad, 0.6 WAR. Like that is pretty truly horrendous. Noelvi Marte, just at the price, you're paying a 140 ADP, a pick 140 there for someone with a very limited track record. The Reds have sent him to the minors multiple times before, so it's not like they are truly invested in Noelvi Marte at this point. And I think you've got like Christian Encarnacion Strand down there. You've got Sal Stewart that's up and should play. Like there's just a bunch of bodies at corner outfield, third base, corner outfield, corner infield, that if Noelvi Marte, like, yes, I think he starts with the team and starts on opening day, but we've seen pretty rough stretches from Noelvi Marte before. I think if we get another one, there's a very real chance Noelvi Marte certainly is benched, but even worse, sent down to AAA. And I just think, like, yes, there's a ceiling there. This guy's only 24 years old, and we saw really nice spurts from Noelvi Marte in 360 plate appearances last year in Cincinnati, but man, the floor is very low. The floor is lava, as my kids would say. The floor is in the minors, and with the floor that low, the way that I draft, I can't spend a top 150 pick on that type of profile.
All right, so should we agree then that it's Teoscar Hernandez and Noelvi Marte who are the biggest risks in the first 10 rounds of being this year's Nick Castellanos? We're going to put them as bigger risks than Agustin Ramirez.
Yeah, I think Marte, the riskiest, maybe Teoscar after that. Again, kills me. I think the bat improves with Teoscar Hernandez, so I think he'll beat that 1.6 WAR projection, but it's something to certainly consider. And I'll defend the honor of the goose, Agustin Ramirez. I think he's in the clear. I'm not too worried about him, despite the admittedly very low WAR projection this year.
All right, so that's the players projected for less than 2 wins above replacement, so less than an average regular going in the first 10 rounds. We will move on to some players who are projected for less than a win and a half, who are still going in the top 200 picks right after this message from our sponsor, Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Coming from another service, Fantrax makes it easy. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues and customize if needed. Fantrax offers the most in-depth player pool in the industry, including minor league players. Do you need a customizable commissioner service for your fantasy league? Fantrax offers more customization than any other platform. Waivers, categories, scoring system, schedule. Fantrax offers custom solutions for all that and more, and it's all free. Sign up for free today. Simply go to fantrax.com/rotowire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/rotowire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. And welcome back to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Erik Halterman here, joined by Ryan Bloomfield of Baseball HQ, discussing the candidates for next year's Nick Castellanos. We're going to move on to the players projected for less than a win and a half in just a second, but we've got a couple interesting questions here. Thanks to everybody who joined us live in the YouTube. We've got a question about Marcell Ozuna, who fits, I think, with today's theme somewhat, although he must have been projected for just a little bit too much to fit on any of today's lists of players. Looks like he's projected for 1.1 WAR. MJ here says they've been drafting Ozuna in round 22 to 25 in 12-team draft and hold, so that's pick 250, 275-ish, if my math on the fly is right. What are your thoughts on him signing with a team this year? He did put up incredible numbers in 23 and 24. I mean, this is the guy whose playing time could really zero out. Marcell Ozuna might just not find the team because A, the performance trending in the wrong direction, B, some off-field things where you worry a team might just not want that guy on their team if he's not going to be a star. Unfortunately, that is how things tend to go. Are we worried about Marcell Ozuna bottoming out?
Yeah, it's certainly a wide range of outcomes because I think the later we go and closer we get to spring training, the riskier. And unlike with Harrison Bader that we talked about at the top of the show, kind of figured he would sign somewhere. I certainly don't think it's a lock that Marcell Ozuna signs with somebody. So it's a risky pick, especially in a draft and hold where you're stuck with that player all season. I actually like Ozuna more in fab leagues right now, where you get the cheap price, and if he signs, great. And if Ozuna doesn't sign, oh well, you spend a late pick, you drop him, and you move on. You're going to churn that roster spot anyway. So, yeah, I in a draft and hold, I've been staying away from Ozuna just because there are some Castellanos type qualities. If we bring it back to the theme of the show, where at age 35, this could dovetail quickly and doesn't provide any obviously defensive prowess at all. So still a chance it's a good pick. Just depends where / if Ozuna signs. And honestly, man, I haven't heard any kind of whisperings, rumblings on Ozuna signing with anyone yet. Not to say it won't happen, but you're putting a little bit of a leap of faith there.
Yeah, I like that thought about targeting him more in a fab league than a draft and hold. I think that does make some sense. I do want to just throw in this question as well. I guess it's not a question, more of a statement. Alex Bregman's going to bust at Wrigley. Kind of the opposite, actually, of the Castellanoses that we're talking about, because Bregman plays good defense and walks a ton, so he's going to play no matter what. It's just a question of, is he going to play well in that park? Again, not exactly on topic, but it is worth mentioning. It's not a good park for Alex Bregman.
Quite the statement from our guy. Quite the statement.
Yep. Thank you, Uncle Ted, for joining us today. Back to the main topic today, though. Let's take a look at some players who could be the next Nick Castellanos, going inside the top 200 picks. These are players who are projected for between 1.5 WAR and are going between picks 150 and 200. So a little bit less risk if you take one of these guys and they completely whiff. But, pick 167, which is where the top guy on the list is, Dylan Cruz. You don't want to throw away that pick for nothing. I don't think you're getting nothing out of Dylan Cruz, but he is projected for just 1.1 WAR. This is a different type of player who has a very low projection, unlike some of the guys who don't play defense and don't walk and are getting older. This is just a guy who simply hasn't shown it yet. Do you think Dylan Cruz at pick 167, do you think you're going to get enough? This is the guy who was worth 0.2 wins above replacement last year.
Yeah, it was a really rough season last year for Cruz, though. Honestly, I think it was very much injury beleaguered, injury plagued, and I'm pretty willing to give Dylan Cruz a pass, especially, kid's going to be 20. This is age 24 season, pretty much a consensus top 5 overall prospect. You look at the Nationals, I like their lineup actually, but it's a young team. They're supposedly shopping CJ Abrams. They don't really have a pitching staff. I don't really see them competing this year. I think they are going to give Dylan Cruz all the reps he can to grow at the major league level. So certainly someone who I think is better in fantasy than in real life. And we see that in the WAR number, which is again, pretty abysmal, but really like the stolen base ceiling with Dylan Cruz. And you just never know when it's all going to click for Dylan Cruz. I think it will happen at some point. When it does, the upside, the ceiling with Cruz is there. So I'm not worried about Dylan Cruz losing playing time really at all, unless he gets injured, which we can't control or predict.
Yeah, and if there's no loss of playing time, I think the floor for Cruz should still be, 15-15, maybe 15-20.
Yeah.
Right? As long as he's in there, he's going to steal you some bases and he's going to hit you some homers. I don't think I'm too worried about Dylan Cruz. But this next guy on the list is another young player who I think I am more worried about, Samuel Basallo, going to pick 171, projects for just a single win above replacement. Now, this could be a case of the projections not always getting with the young up-and-coming talents right away. They need you to prove it to them. A projection system like Oopsie, which is more able to respond to small sample data because it looks at things that become relevant quickly, like, say, bat speed. Oopsie projects Samuel Basallo for 2.1 wins. It also projects a 118 WRC plus compared to just 97 for ATC. So this could be one where you could take a look at other projection systems and say there's no reason to worry at all about Samuel Basallo. But as exciting as he is, this was a guy who was one of the best hitters in the minors last year as a 19-year-old or 20-year-old catcher at AAA. Love that. There is real bottom-out potential here, right? There is a world where Samuel Basallo spends most of the year in the minors or not playing regularly.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad you say that, because I've been off of Basallo as well this year, and for a lot of similar reasons. Like, yes, every scouting report I read is off the charts. The number, he's kind of scat the stat line with the minors with Basallo, and it's awesome. You just never know how that translates immediately to the major leagues, and then you have the added kind of point here that Baltimore has 2 catchers. So, I think they're still going to play Adley Rutschman, who is a good real life player. It gets on base, it kind of leads that team. So you've got 2 spots, and yes, Basallo could DH, but I think Orioles have and want to kind of rotate that DH spot with a bunch of other decent players that they have too. So I don't know if there is a full-time DH role for Basallo. So I don't know. I mean, on the flip side, he did sign a pretty massive contract extension, which I do think matters in terms of kind of motivation for the team to play Basallo. But I think you just add on the price of like a 171 ADP at catcher. It's your kind of late catcher 1, early catcher 2. In 2 catcher leagues, I think that bottom out risk is a little bit too much for me to go after Basallo, just given, it's crowded. We don't know how those elite minor league numbers will translate right away to the majors. There's just too many questions for me. I think you're muted. There you go.
I was going to say something terrible. Good thing nobody heard it. I was surprised.
I could lip read. Want me to repeat it? No,
yeah. I was surprised the price came in so hot on Basallo. He's somebody I expected to be all over because, again, if you hit like he did as a very young player at AAA, that bodes really well for your eventual ceiling at the big league level. But, man, it's all priced in right away, and there are not that many clear pathways for him to play, so he's going to need to hit. I don't think he can ease himself in here. Should we maybe group these 3 first basemen together here? Because I think mostly the fact that they're on this list is a product of the fact that if you're a good but not great hitter and you're a first baseman, you don't really put up that many WAR. That's why you see a lot of these guys not signing massive free agent contracts, but we've got Alec Burleson, Christian Walker, and Spencer Torkelson all going from around pick 188 to 196 and all projecting for between 1.1 WAR and 1.4. That says that those 3 players are below average regulars. Do you think Alec Burleson, Christian Walker, and Spencer Torkelson nevertheless all have pretty safe paths to playing time all year, or do you think any of them might really bottom out like Castellanos?
Yeah, it's a tough group. So, I mean, to kind of go through each one, like Burleson, it's kind of a wait and see. Like, I think if Alec Burleson stays on St. Louis, I think St. Louis is kind of playing out the string. Sorry, Cardinals fans, but it sucks to play out the string before the season even starts. But given some other moves that the Cardinals have made, I think if Burleson stays on the Cardinals, I think your playing time is going to be okay there. There's a very real risk Alec Burleson gets traded. And if he gets traded to a contender, then yes, I could see Alec Burleson's playing time drying up quite quickly and being kind of a utility role. Christian Walker's been embroiled in trade talks as well with Houston. They've got Isaac Paredes kind of potentially ready and waiting right behind there. So on top of that, you also have the age. I believe this is Christian Walker's age 35 season. Yes, age 35 season. So to the Castellanos point, things do not improve when you're 35. Trust me, things do not improve. They only get worse at that point. So certainly risk there with Christian Walker, even though the projection, if you just look at the projection on the surface, it looks great at the 191 ADP. There's some downside to that playing time outlook. And then Torque, I feel like Torque's fine, but you never know. I mean, Detroit has sent Torque down. And this time a year ago, Torque was basically going to start the season in the minors. I think he has kind of graduated from that, but I don't know. I think in terms of if I had to rank these guys in terms of which one I'm most worried about, I would say Christian Walker, Burleson, and then Torkelson least.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I would certainly agree on Walker being the biggest risk just because the age. I mean, guys who bottom out, like we're talking about, usually it is age suddenly hits them when you think they've got a couple more years. If they age gradually and suddenly the cliff comes, and you could even argue that the cliff came for Christian Walker last year. Sure. I'll give you his WRC plus for the last 4 years: 122, 120, 120. So remarkably stable. And then 99. He dipped all the way to a technically below average hitter last year, thanks mostly to his inability to get on base. It was just a 297 OBP. He walked just 6.3% of the time. Strikeouts were also the worst we've seen from him since 2018. So you can make the case that Christian Walker is already heading in that direction, and all it would take is another slight step back, and you're not going to play a first baseman with a 90 WRC plus, right? It's already dicey if he's no better than he was last year.
Especially if you have Isak potentially right there. It's just an easy swap.
All right. So Christian Walker probably going to be the most worrisome player on this list. But we do have one more in this group, and that is Addison Barger of the Blue Jays, projected for 1.3 wins. Should note here, I've included the plate appearances column for anybody following along on the video version, and the plate appearances are projected lower for Addison Barger. That's part of the reason why the WAR is projected lower. He's only being projected for 454 plate appearances, according to ATC right now. And I think that's fair, even though I could certainly see him getting to 600. The Blue Jays have a crowded roster, particularly after adding Kazuma Okamoto. I just checked to see if Barger's going much later the last couple weeks, and he really isn't. If you look at the last 2 weeks only, he's going at pick 203, so not much lower than the 199 that I have here. Is there bottom out potential with Addison Barger, or do you think he showed enough last year that actually he's still a value?
I think he's... I don't know. Neither, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if Barger's a value just because the plate appearance. I agree with the plate appearance projection. I think this is a platoon bat. So I don't really see. It's a career 534 OPS against left-handed pitching for Addison Barger. You mentioned the arrival of Okamoto. So I just don't see Addison Barger being an everyday player, and it's hard to draft platoon guys in the top 200. For me, even though I like the third base outfield eligibility, Toronto's so good and they're going for it all this year that any kind of slowdown, like kind of we saw from Barger at the end of last season, hit 205 with a 630 OPS over the last 2 months last year. Another stretch like that, this guy is not playing. So I think this is again where like the team context can work both ways. You can have a ton of stability, like if you're Dylan Cruz playing on the Nationals. And it can flip both ways where if you're on Toronto, like you better produce or you're not playing just because they have better alternatives and they're going for it this year. So I am certainly not in on Addison Barger at the price, given the way he finished and given the fact that I think at best this is a strong side platoon.
All right, fair enough. We got a little pushback in the chat here about Christian Walker. Paul saying that he had a 120 WRC plus in the second half. It's a good point. Fair point. Christian Walker, if you might remember, had a terrible start to the season. Was it last year that he was dealing with minor injury issues in spring training and he was not good at the start of the year, and then he actually was himself 120 WRC plus. Again, that's exactly where he was the 3 years before. So maybe he's fine, but among the players in this group, this is the 1 to 1.5 WAR guys. Is he still the biggest risk for the next year's Nick Castellanos?
I would say of this group, I would say yes, just given the age and the replacements that Houston potentially could have there.
All right, let's move on to our final list of candidates here. This is all the players who are projected for 1 WAR or fewer who are going in the top 300 picks. So some of the guys at the bottom of this list, you're not really missing out on too much if they do bust. So maybe they're not the best candidates for the next year's Nick Castellanos, but I wanted to throw them on here as well. The top of this list has Agustin Ramirez. Again, we've already talked about him, and Noelvi Marte. We've already talked about him, but it is interesting to see that everybody else projected for similar WAR tends to be around pick 200 to 300. You got those guys at 81 and 140. Here's a name, though, that we haven't talked about yet. Chandler Simpson only projects for 0.9 WAR. That's over 444 plate appearances, yet he's going in round 11 in a 15-team league. I mean, I think we know that there's bottom-out potential with Chandler Simpson. It won't look like Nick Castellanos, although it is another probable corner outfielder with below-average defense, so he's got at least one Castellanos trait in him. Do you think there's a world where Simpson just produces nothing, spends, 5 months in the minors?
I think there is an absolute world. I think that world is the world we live in right now is Earth.
Okay.
I'm very low on Chandler Simpson. I know he's polarizing. So I mean, I'll make the case against Simpson. I honestly, if I think I know the player archetype is different, the ages are different, but I think if there's one player who I think is this year's Nick Castellanos, I think it's Chandler Simpson. Just in terms of someone, if the production with the bat dries up, you are not playing. I think this is the most likely player of anybody within like the top 200 picks. We can, like you said, if you go to further down this list, once you get around 250, everyone has flaws at that point. But like, I don't know if Chandler Simpson either even starts on opening day for the team. I think best case is a platoon bat. I think the Rays have other other options there. The real life defense for Chandler Simpson is not there at all. They just gave up a ton for Jacob Melton, who I think they may want to start over Chandler Simpson if that does come down to a one-on-one showdown. So on top of that, fantasy wise, for Chandler Simpson, this is an all eggs in one basket type of approach for stolen bases. So if on draft day you select Chandler Simpson, you put that into your RotoWire draft kit tool, and it shows you 50 stolen bases. You think you're good in steals. You've got no redundancy there. If anything happens to Chandler Simpson, your team build is essentially broken for one category. And I don't like building teams that way anyway. I especially don't like doing it for someone who I think there's a very real chance is in the minors for, I would say our good friend at Bub and the Blue, Martin Sokolsky, laid this out. More days in the minors or more stolen bases for Chandler Simpson in 2026. Yeah. And I lean more days in the minors. I think this is just someone, if you're behind on steals, wait a little bit, grab Jose Caballero, grab Crawford for Philly. I think go that route. I think Crawford's a much better, at least safer playing time outlook, Justin Crawford and Philly. So I would go with those two guys over Chandler Simpson if you're in a bind for stolen bases. So that's my case against Chandler Simpson. I don't know if you want to pick holes in that or if you're on board with me there, but that's how I feel there.
Yeah, I'm mostly with you. I think that I would say my impression of the worst case scenario is that it's a little bit less likely than you're saying, but it absolutely is present. I mean, the guy isn't a good defender, and he's not a good hitter either. He hit 295, and yet he only had a 671 OPS, an 88 WRC plus. It's the emptiest batting average out there, and while we don't care too much about that, we will take the high number in one category, and we'll deal with the lopsided value. Batting average is not the way baseball teams analyze hitters anymore. Don't tell certain people on the internet, but it simply is not anymore. Chandler Simpson could hit 300, and he might slash 300, 310, 310, and that's not good enough to keep you in the majors. So real risk with Chandler Simpson, and like you said, you don't want to lose half your projected stolen bases with one roster move, and that could absolutely happen. The next guy on the list here, we are sorting this by ADP, but his ADP is not accurate for where he's going right now. That's Matt Shaw, who's going at least 50 or 100 picks later than pick 192 here after he got bumped to what seems to be a utility role by the Cubs. He is only projected for 0.4 WAR. That comes in not very many plate appearances, just 270. But hey, if you do the math there and say, what if he was a full-time player? What if the Cubs do trade Nico Hoerner? Or what if the Cubs trade Matt Shaw and he's a full-time player elsewhere? You multiply this, you do the math and get it to per 600 plate appearances. You're still talking about a guy who projects for about one win. He still might actually fit on this list, even with a full playing time projection. Matt Shaw, projections do not like his bat. Do you think that he's going to play? Do you think even if the Cubs trade Nico Hoerner, he's going to play, right?
Yeah, but how big is that if?
Right.
I mean, the Cubs actually need to trade Nico Hoerner. It's been talked about, but I have no idea how likely that may be. I mean, this is the Nick Castellanos effect that we've already seen with Matt Shaw, right? With the signing of Bregman, you just drafted a guy who lost his job, and though Shaw is young and I think long term has a pretty good ceiling, Cubs are going for it this year relatively, and yeah, Bregman, and all of a sudden playing time's gone. So, recent drafts for Matt Shaw has been like a 250 ADP. And I think even there, I don't want to pick someone at 250 and have to hope for a trade for them to get regular playing time. So this is the Castellanos effect in action. We've already kind of seen this where you take someone and boom, the playing time's gone. So maybe it comes back. Maybe they trade Shaw himself. Who knows? I think there are plenty of teams who would like to take a shot on Matt Shaw, just given the long-term outlook and what have you for him. But as of now, this is a example A of why poor real life value can cost you playing time.
Yeah, so if you're drafting Matt Shaw, even at a discount right now, you're begging for a trade just to give him any hope of paying off that draft price. And even then, you're selecting a guy who had a hard hit rate under 30% last year. There just might not be a whole lot there in his bat. Should we pair the next two outfielders together? A couple young guys who haven't quite done it yet. That's Jasson Dominguez of the Yankees, projecting for 0.9 WAR, and Jack Caglianone of the Royals, projecting for just half a win. Real bottom out potential with these two, and Dominguez may have already been close to bottoming out. I'm not even sure he has a starting role on opening day, so pretty worried about him. And don't we have to be worried about Caglianone too? I mean, he's going to have to hit to keep his job.
Yeah, full agree on Jasson Dominguez. I think the Yankees have not shown the willingness to play Jasson Dominguez, and nothing has changed, in my opinion, on that outlook for the offseason, especially given the re-signing of Cody Bellinger, right? So like maybe if Bellinger wasn't in the fray here, maybe that opens a spot for Jasson Dominguez, but playing time was maddening for him last year, and I just don't see that changing right now anyway. So similar to like a Matt Shaw, I'd love to see the Yankees hashtag free Jasson Dominguez, but there's no reason to think they would do that. Like nothing has changed there. So very worried about Dominguez to the point where I'm not drafting him at pick 200. I'd rather take like a Brian Reynolds. Honestly, I mean, that's the way I draft. I like kind of old, boring veterans, but the playing time's going to be there. Caglianone, I don't know, man. This was my biggest fab pickup last year, so I'm still bitter / biased on this. I still think Caglianone is going to be a good player. The under the hood metrics, so to speak, look really good for Jack Cags. At some point, it does need to result in production. So I think if Jack Cags comes out the first month, 6 weeks, and we see what we saw from him last year, very much bust potential and back to the minors for Caglianone. But I just have faith that, I mean, the strikeout rate was so good, the hard hit numbers were so good. I just feel like that bad luck is going to correct, and thus Jack Caglianone's projected WAR will go up this year. But that's a little bit of a leap of faith, I admit.
Yeah, it'll need to go up 1.5 wins, and if it does, he'll still be a below replacement level player. Jack Caglianone was worth minus 1.6 WAR according to Fangraphs, tied with Lamont Wade Jr. And can you guess, Ryan or listeners, who was the one player with lower WAR than Jack Caglianone last year?
Nick Castellanos.
No, he was worth a whole negative 0.6. The correct answer is Michael Toglia was worth minus 2.2 WAR. So if we were doing this show last year, Michael Toglia would be the one. And you know what? Maybe we should title this show this year's Michael Toglia. That'll really get people excited. Yeah, if you strike out 39% of the time and have a 54 WRC plus as a first baseman, you're going to be pretty far below replacement level. Speaking of the Rockies, though, Jordan Beck is the next guy on here. He's projected to play quite a lot and only produce 0.3 wins above replacement. I mean, I could see that happening. I don't think Jordan Beck is that exciting of a real life player. He's somebody who was worth 0.9 wins over a full season last year, but he's got to be okay for fantasy purposes, right? Is there anybody who's about to take his job, or is Jordan Beck just going to go out there and give us another 1 win but very productive fantasy season?
Yeah, I think this is another better fantasy guy than real life, just because the stolen bases are a big part of what Jordan Beck brings to the package, and he's not the biggest OBP guy. So like batting average is good. Again, like you said earlier, teams don't value batting average like we do in fantasy, and the stolen bases are much more impactful in our game, our 5x5 game, than they are in real life. But that said, yeah, man, I just think Jordan Beck, age 25, like I think the Rockies, we all know they're not going anywhere. If you send Jordan Beck back down to the minors, is that ultimately benefiting you / him long term? I think the leash has got to be pretty long for Jordan Beck, even if he slumps. I think the Rockies have to give him some leash to have him figure it out. But again, who are we to predict what the Colorado Rockies are going to decide and do? That's a exercise in futility.
Yeah, speaking of Rockies outfielders, let's just jump down 2 spots on this list. Mickey Moniak only projected for the same 0.3 wins in a little bit less playing time, probably more of a platoon
Yep.
likelihood there for Mickey Moniak. But can we also say he's probably going to be good enough to play at least against every righty for the Rockies?
I think so, and I think Moniak actually took a really nice skills supported step forward last year, where the projections, as they should, are going to kind of regress that back to Mickey Moniak's admittedly horrendous major league career norm. But I think the leash is long there. I mean, the trouble with Moniak, it's a double split, right? It's lefty righty for Moniak, but it's also with any Rockies player, it's home away. So there are certain weeks, if you're in a weekly league and certainly in daily leagues, that you pretty much never want to start Mickey Moniak on the road against the lefty. He's probably not in the lineup anyway against the lefty, but in weekly leagues that can be tough. But I think in general, the power step forward that Moniak took last year with 24 homers in 461 plate appearances was supported by pretty big jump in barrel rate and some of the kind of raw power metrics that we saw. I mean, former top pick, age 28. Still young enough where he can kind of have that post hype breakout season. So I'm fine with Mickey Moniak where the price is. I know the ceiling isn't super high just because he's capped by playing time and again those road splits.
All right, there's a question on here. Where is Brenton Doyle? Just real quick, looking up how much WAR he's projected for. He's projected for 1.6 because Brenton Doyle can play defense, and I think that means he's going to play. I think the guys that we're worried about today are the guys who are decent hitters with not much else, and they're the ones who really could bottom out, which might describe the two players who slotted in between those two Rockies outfielders, Anthony Santander and Spencer Steer, both of them bat first players whose bats aren't that good and who play for teams that have enough talent on the roster that they don't need to play Anthony Santander and Spencer Steer. And Santander had a worse season last year dealing with injuries, really did not look good at all. Steer for a couple years now has actually been a technically below average hitter, WRC plus of 98 and 97 the last 2 years for a guy who now is mostly a first baseman and occasional left fielder. That's not good enough. Is there real bottom out potential with Santander and Steer?
Yeah, I think in different ways. For me, for Santander, I think there's a real risk the shoulder's still like messed up, and that's unfortunately, I mean, could be a lingering thing for the rest of, at least for the short to midterm for Santander. It was truly an awful year last year. He does have the benefit of the contract with Toronto, but I think Toronto is so all in for this year that they're probably willing to eat that money and not play Santander every day, but just because of his contract. So you're banking on the shoulder being right and healing this offseason. And certainly there's a chance that happens, but then there's also a risk where if this is the same guy we saw last year, is kind of a worthless player. Steer for a kind of a different reason. Like, I mean, for all the reasons I just kind of bagged Noelvi Marte a few minutes ago on the show, also applies to Spencer Steer. There's just a lot of bodies, capable bodies, and on that Cincinnati Reds roster at corner infield, corner outfield. I think anyone who struggles, I think you're going to have a short leash there. So I could see a path where if Steer struggles and Noelvi Marte starts great, then Steer's out of playing time, but vice versa can also be true. So mildly worried about both of those guys.
All right. How about the final guy going inside the top 250 and just barely? That's Adolis Garcia, who is
the replacement.
literally this year's Nick Castellanos. And
Exactly.
honestly, at the plate, he's kind of the same guy. His glove is a whole lot better, and so that might keep him as a one WAR player rather than a negative half a WAR player. But there's real bottom out potential with Adolis Garcia, isn't it? Wouldn't it be very poetic if next year's Nick Castellanos is his exact replacement?
Yeah, what a way to close this out with the same position, same team, and exact replacement. Same age, right? Adolis, age 33 season, which is what Castellanos was last year. Adolis, 271 on base percentage last year. That is truly awful, and that's followed by or following, I should say, a 284 OBP. So it's been 2 straight years of unrosterable on base percentages. So I would say moderately to quite high risk Adolis Garcia has Nick Castellanos potential here, and it's just not playable. That's the glass half empty approach, right? Of course, we see these all the times. We saw this with like George Springer last year. they still have something left in them. And what if there's a chance Adolis Garcia goes back to the 2022/2023 version of himself? I think that's certainly within the range of outcomes too. So a wide range of outcomes, but yeah, if you're taking that glass half empty approach and just looking at the same team, same position, decent chance this is a front runner Adolis for 2026's Nick Castellanos.
Yeah, definitely pretty worried about that one. I'll just real quick read off the names who are going between pick 250 and 300, but I think these guys are late enough that even if there's bottom out risk, you'll probably be okay. Brett Beatty, Giancarlo Stanton, Mark Vientos, Josh Lowe, Lenin Sosa, Ryan O'Hearn, Dylan Beavers, Andrew Vaughn. I think I'd be fine taking a chance on any of these guys given the price, but is there any that you see as either no risk of bottoming out or extreme risk?
I would say that extreme risk probably Mark Vientos, right? Like there's a lot of bodies with the Mets and a lot of avid Mets fans, watchers were very down on Vientos, just ethics, work ethic wise and all that. And it's you see that reflected in the WAR. I think the welcome may be worn there for Mark Vientos in Queens. So worried about him for sure.
All right. Got a comment in the chat here saying PCA is a big bust candidate. That's certainly true. But I think that I want to bring this up because the reason I gathered these players today is the type of bust that you're fearing from the players we're talking about today is that they just become unusable. They give you nothing. They get DFA'd, they become bench players, they get sent down, etc. And that is a categorically different thing than I think what will happen if PCA busts, because PCA's glove is so good that the Cubs were still using him every day, even against lefties who he could not hit at all. I'm pretty sure that the bust version of a PCA season still has him playing, 150 games and still has him racking up pretty decent counting stats just, 5 or 6 rounds after where you actually drafted him. And I think for a player like that, you can worry a little bit less about the bust. You should be aware of it, but there's a very big difference between somebody not playing and somebody just playing worse than you thought.
Agreed. The glove is so good with Pico Armstrong. He's going to get every opportunity to figure things out. And really, honestly, look at the underlying skills first half, second half for PCA last year. Not much of a difference, despite how markedly different the surface stats were. So yeah, I agreed. There is very little Nick Castellanos type of path to irrelevance with Pico Armstrong.
All right, and we're just going to end here real quick with a quick look at the inverse here. What I did here is I took a look not at the WAR projection, but the WAR per 600 projection, which is not an official projected stat from ATC, and sometimes the math gets a little wonky when the denominator is very low. Some of these guys are not projected for many plate appearances at all. I actually removed the catchers because catchers were doing weird things. We were getting third string catchers who were projected for 6 wins over 600 plate appearances because they were only projected for 10 plate appearances in the first place or something like that. But these are a handful of players who ATC says if you gave them a full-time role, 600 plate appearances, they'd be at least an average regular. These are guys going outside of pick 400, so maybe some late round draft and hold guys. It's mostly prospects. Emmanuel Rodriguez is the top guy on this list. Gabriel Rincones of the Phillies, Walker Jenkins, Michael Arroyo, but also see some guys who've had some major league time. Trey Sweeney, Jonathan Clase, Emmanuel Valdez. Davis Schneider is on here. That's interesting. Yep. Ryan McMahon also on here. Nacho Alvarez, Ryan Clifford, and Colt Emerson, the last few names. I don't totally know what to do with this group. I just thought it would be interesting to have a little bit of positivity on today's show. Anybody here stand out as, actually, maybe I should give that guy more of a look?
Yeah, and it's tough with again, a lot of these guys are prospects. It's just tough to kind of extend that projection to 600 plate appearances. But I think, if we're going to end on a high note, I would say Colt Emerson at a pick 460. I know he's super young. I know he's listed as shortstop on this sheet, and that's what he typically had played. But I think the longer the Mariners go without re-signing potentially Eugenio Suarez, I think the chances of Colt Emerson with a hot spring training is your starting third baseman on opening day for the Seattle Mariners. And you look at any kind of scouting report, numbers for Colt Emerson in the minors. Yes, he would be like a 20-year-old starting on opening day. It's kind of iffy. If the Mariners don't sign Suarez, they have nothing at the hot corner right now. I think it's like Ben Williamson might be their starting third baseman. And I just think, again, the longer the Mariners go without doing anything at third base, there's a better chance that Colt Emerson is starting on the team, and it's at an ADP of 416. It's not going to kill you if you take a dart throw there and you're wrong. It's not gonna kill you. So take your shot there on potentially shortstop / third base eligible Colt Emerson in 2026.
Yeah, that's a good shout there. We also got this comment from Raj in the chat who says, if Adolis Garcia bottoms out, then Gabriel Rincon should take his place. That's a good point. If you're in a draft and hold and you did still take Adolis Garcia, despite the Nick Castellanos potential there, do think about grabbing Gabriel Rincon late in your draft. But that's pretty much going to do it for the topic I had today, Ryan. Should mention this was only hitters, because I think it only works for hitters, because the difference there is a category of player who is, good in real life as a hitter and not very good in fantasy, right? Guys who get on base a lot, but maybe don't have much power and don't steal bases and play good defense. That's a good real life player. And the inverse is what we talked about today. Do you think this works for pitchers? I mean, obviously there's, say, really good setup men who have good real life value and not fantasy value, but in general, does this type of analysis only really work on the offensive side?
That's what I was just gonna say. Maybe for relievers, you've got great setup men, but they're not valuable in fantasy. But that's a whole separate kind of thing. So no, I think there is way too much overlap between fantasy value and real life value for pitchers. I can't think of a starting pitcher where I have ever said this guy's more valuable in real life than in fantasy. Whereas hitters, there's just so much of that window where it's on base percentage and it's defense that matters so much in real life, and for fantasy it doesn't. So I think I would not do a pitcher Castellanos episode, Erik, if I'm running your show.
Yeah, although I would be down for Nick Castellanos pitcher convert to try to stick around in the league a couple years. I'd be here for that. I bet
maybe you could throw the softball game at First Pitch Arizona next year.
Yeah, there you go. I would love to hit some dingers off of Nick Castellanos. But that's going to do it for us today. Thank you very much to everybody who hung out in the chat, and thank you, Ryan, for going over the candidates for this year's Nick Castellanos. Pretty worried about Teoscar Hernandez, Noelvi Marte, maybe Christian Walker, definitely Chandler Simpson, a good mix of guys who really could bottom out. Good talking negativity with you today, Ryan. Thank you very much for coming on. Why don't you remind everybody what you have going on right now?
Absolutely. Thanks, Erik. Appreciate it, man. Good to see you again. Bubba and the Bloom podcast, and then writing over at Baseball HQ this year.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, listeners. And thank you to our sponsor, Fantrax. Our regular podcast schedule is about to start up very soon here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast.